Today we have a very special guest joining us, Marz. Marz is a professional mining engineer with over 30 years of progressive experience in mining operations and project management. Prior to joining Wallbridge, he held the position of Executive VP of Global Mining for Genivar, a large Canadian firm now known as WSP Global, where he led the development and growth of the company's domestic and international mining profile. During the early part of his career with Falconbridge, Marz was involved in mining operations in both Sudbury and Timmins. Marz's experience includes managing large, multidisciplinary teams of engineers and operators, as well as extensive experience in developing strategic growth plans and mergers and acquisitions. Thanks again for joining us on The Rocks. Let's dive in. Well, Marz, thank you so much for coming on The Rocks. We're really excited to have you on and to hear the story of your company and what you all are doing and what our listeners would be really interested to hear about. Before we start, you are not having a cocktail today, right? You're just sticking to water.
For now.
I am actually trying a new bourbon, Angel's Envy's, the port wine finished one that they have that my COO, John, gave me as a birthday present last week. Yeah.
Well, happy belated.
Thank you. And he knows that I really like bourbons and scotches that have like a rum finish to them. But this is my first port wine. So
that's good. Enjoy it.
Thanks.
I'll enjoy mine later.
So Marz, tell us a little bit about your company, and I'd love you to focus on the fact that you're at this really key development stage in what you all are doing.
Yeah. So Wallbridge had always been known for copper nickel PGM exploration, and about late 2015, we looked at the exploration situation after the financial crisis was really forcing most of the junior companies to either look inside to see if they can create more value for their shareholders, because exploration is risky and it takes sometimes too long, especially when it comes to base metal assets. So we assembled an M&A team, looked at a lot of projects, and we came up with this project called Fenelon, which was owned by a junior company named Balmoral Resources at the time. It was non-core to them. We purchased that, and they already had about 40,000 ounces at surface that previous owners had continued to Swiss cheese it. It was high grade, but when we looked at it in the due diligence, we saw a lot of opportunities for us to actually, this gold system was there that nobody ever had followed up, because everybody was promoting it as a high-grade deposit and really covering this very small area of 150 meters down to about 150 meters. So we purchased that. At the time when our market cap was $5 million, we purchased it for about $3.5 million in cash, and we borrowed the money, and we paid that back, by the way, about 18 months after. We started exploring on it. We continued with what the previous owners had done, but we continued to expand it, but incrementally. But we've seen a lot of targets on that, and we followed up on one of those targets. It was actually late December, just before Christmas. Guys were going to go on holidays, taking the drills, put them on standby. One of our geologists said, one of those 11 targets, if we can drill, we're already at the end of the hole, we still have 2 days before Christmas. We'd like to extend that hole to follow up on one of those targets. And your typical finds story. And sure enough, about 60 meters or 70 meters past the original target, they started hitting this kind of a different type of mineralization. But it's the same gold system, but it was more of a disseminated gold, visible gold and everything else. We carried on drilling throughout the entire Christmas holidays, and past New Year's, we were over 200 and some odd meters in mineralization. This is 200 and some odd meters of mineralized gold mineralization. And that was actually the whole number 51, believe it or not. But the guys came back after the holidays. They were trying to name it. So my VP exploration called, and I'm going to take the credit for this because I actually said, because I heard one of them said, when they wanted that target, they said, I think it's out there. That's what I remember the word out there. And the whole 51. So we decided to call the zone Area 51. That's the story of our Area 51. And then following up on that, we discovered another zone called Tabasco, which was the original theme of our deposit, because it was all peppers names, Tabasco, Cayenne, and Naga Viper, and all that stuff. Geologists come up with these creative names. So in any case, since then, obviously, our exploration has shown that there's a large gold system. It's a multi-million ounce deposit. Our market cap reached as much as 800 million. But, certainly since then we pulled back. And that's because of this stage of the project, which is a subject of what we're going to talk about. As an exploration company, you have this discovery zone, this excitement, if you may. You carry on with excitement in 2019 and 2020. We created a lot of that. I mean, we had some fantastic results. We still do. But the fantastic results, if they repeat it, it's no longer sexy. It's no longer exciting because everybody expects that. So as a result, the share has been pulled back, but the patience will be rewarded. We know that.
At what point would you define a company or a project as hitting development stage compared to exploration? I think for some of our non-mining expert listeners, it might be helpful to clarify what that process looks like, moving from exploration into development, and then, of course, eventually production.
So every project is different, obviously. You can carry out just doing exploration until you come up with your resource estimate and you carry it into an economic study and even all the way to a bankable feasibility study. And then you go and finance the project and put it into development stage and then develop that and you then bring it into production. Other projects that are hybrid, which is similar to ours, is that we wanted to de-risk the project. So as a result, we did go ahead and did some infrastructure underground that can be used in the future, for future operations. But it's still in a sort of exploration and development stage because you're creating some infrastructure that you're going to use in the future. You're establishing requisite studies for the future economic studies, if you may, like geotechnical, geochemical, all of those other studies that are really needed to do. And the reason you do that is because you don't want to keep going ahead and drilling for a resource, come up with a resource estimate, and realize now we got to do environmental studies and we're going to have to wait 2 years for a water study. You carry those out in anticipation that you will bring this to this ultimate stage of production.
Yeah, and even that company doesn't intend on carrying it through. You still develop the project with that intent, right? So if it changes hands, perhaps it's still development ready.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also de-risking it. At the end of the day, again, we all know exploration is risky. There's all sorts of risks associated. Aside from the commodity price risks, you still have, the technical risks with the project, water management. And, there are mines that have gone ahead and realized that the water inflows too much. They can't really do the kind of mining method they wanted to use. There's different metallurgical challenges with projects. So you do those studies in order to de-risk the project as well. So when you get into development, you don't want to continue spending money on a project on a wrong premise, if you may. And I used to be I'm a mining engineer, and I used to own my own consulting company. I work for a lot of major projects as a QP. It's very important that you start the foundation right for these development projects.
I've had to explain to a lot of folks who are new to how mining works that you can have the most phenomenal asset in the world, but if it's going to cost you more to mine it, then it's really not worth anything. That's kind of where the engineering and the geology really have to be so in sync and planned properly, right?
Yeah, I think there's a terminology for what we call a mineral resource. It has to have reasonable expectation of an economic recovery. So if it doesn't have that, it's no longer a resource. It's just interesting mineralization.
So, for people that are looking to invest in the sector, what kind of benefit could an investor see by investing in a company like yours that has projects at this status, as opposed to maybe the risks and trade-offs of an early stage exploration company or a production company? I know there can be a really significant advantage.
Sure. We talked about the risk in exploration, and I think that's the key thing. Anytime you invest in any company or any project, you always want to assess your own risks, personal risk, and also the investment risk. I would probably, even as an investor myself in other projects, other companies, other assets, one of the key things that you really want to look at is the property itself. Is a project going to give me the kind of a return that I'm expecting because I'm really putting my money into this high-risk project? One. Secondly is, where is it? Because we've all heard a lot of these projects that are perhaps, in the middle of an election in a country that is going to go totally different, you know that overnight the rules can change. We've seen that in major companies who have projects in Europe or in South America, or even junior project companies that have actually gone bust as a result of the fact that things changed overnight. So jurisdiction is important. Our project obviously is in Canada and it's in Quebec. It's a very friendly, mining-friendly jurisdiction. And the First Nation communities really want to work with you in Quebec as well. That would be one of the major criteria, aside from the property itself. But then you really want to see who's running this. What's the track record? And, I don't believe in the track record of somebody who sold a company at a higher price. What I really want to know is, have they been able to deliver what the project requires? For example, Fenelon is a multi-million ounce potential that we're going to come up with a resource estimate by the third quarter of this year. And it has a lot of legs to grow at Fenelon itself. And at Wallbridge, we have the entire land package from Detour Mine on the Quebec side all the way for another 97 kilometers. We basically control that entire land package. So there's also potential for organic growth on other parts of that property. So when you really look at it now, scalability is important, because now you're saying is, Wallbridge may have a potential for increasing my investment today by X. But what's more important is that it could potentially be two ways. One is Wallbridge carries that out, and for the next many years, they cannot find others. Or there are other companies that may be interested in those properties, including the entire company. And those are the reasons why I invest in it. But if you just did exploration, which is what a lot of mining companies or exploration companies do, and you didn't come up with what the market is expecting to see, you're giving a signal that maybe the project is not good enough, or whether your end game is to just sell. From our point of view, the end game is whatever makes best sense for our shareholders. So as a result, if you didn't do anything but just drilling it, you're not creating a lot of value, because you're going to have to continue doing that development. You got to de-risk it, bring it all the way to the next stage. If it's an economic study, the economic study has to be, carried out to the development and the ultimate production stage. That's what I invest in. And so the investors should be cautious of the pump and dumpers, if you may, or guys who go ahead and find a hole and continue to drill in a 10 or 20 meter space to that, but then saying that we have multi-million ounce deposit, whereas incrementally it might take you 20 years before you come up with that multi-million ounce deposit, even if it has the potential.
Now, explain for listeners who may not know what pump and dump means.
There's a lot of cannabis companies that were pump and dump, and there was a lot of, even Bitcoin these days, there's a lot of pump and dump. I guess the whole idea is that if you're promising something, you got to deliver. And if you didn't deliver what you promised, and I'm not talking about the fact that something that you were saying you were going to do and you couldn't do it in that period of time and it took a little longer. Something that doesn't even exist, but you promised, and you're not going to be able to deliver because it doesn't exist. That's pump and dump.
It's all marketing, right? You're doing things that just pump up the stock price so that the people who hold it can, once it gets to a certain point, can dump what they hold and kind of cash out, as opposed to staying involved with the company and actually doing the work that the company is raising money to do.
Exactly. And how many times have you seen a lot of other companies, junior companies, that do mention in their press releases how close they are to the good project nearby? I call that not geology, but neurology. They mention the name, it's 35 kilometers from this property, but in reality, there is no meaning to that, because just because it's 35 kilometers or even 3 kilometers from that property, the prospectivity of it has to be with geology, not necessarily with neurology.
Yeah, and it's this competing thing, I know, when the counter argument is, look for projects near successful projects because the geology is conducive, right? So there's an element of that where you do have mining districts, of course, where you have really prospective geology. But I hear you on if that's all they're saying is that they're close by, your store might be a few blocks from a Target, but that doesn't make you Target.
No, exactly. Exactly. That's right.
Well, no, that's really interesting. So what would you suggest if investors are looking at companies? Certainly, I heard you speak to, the experience of management, right? And does the company follow through on what they say they're going to do, as well as the different kinds of risk? But is there anything else you would really recommend that folks look at if they're new to the industry, trying to look at different companies and projects?
Yeah, I mean, everybody should do a due diligence, their own due diligence. And the due diligence has to start again with what I mentioned. There's certain criteria you want to look. Number one, the property itself, the jurisdiction, management, your access to capital, because in this industry, the capital is important. There are good projects that haven't really been taken off the ground because they haven't been able to really put it together to be able to raise that capital that's needed to advance those projects. Having met all of those, you also want to look at the stage of the project. There is a Lassonde curve everybody's familiar with. I mean, I didn't want to bring that up because I think it's a cliche because everybody uses it. But in reality, it's a true, now with varying degrees, of course, because every project doesn't fit on that curve. But really what you want to look at is, okay, depending on whereabouts on that first curve of the Lassonde is, the company, how can they bring themselves back at the bottom of that Lassonde curve and repeat it again? That's important because if you have a project that has a postage stamp or a company that just has a postage stamp, the opportunity for them to get themselves back at the bottom of the Lassonde curve is not as much as a company that has a larger land package within the same district and has shown the potential. And this is where Walbridge is different. We're currently probably sitting around near the top of the Lassonde first curve because we're coming up with our maiden resource, and the next stage would basically be into the development part of it. But that's only on Fenelon. So when you really look at, our Martinier, which we purchased from Balmoral, we basically purchased Balmoral Resources last year, which is all of the outstanding shares on the properties of Balmoral. So they'd identified other large gold systems in this camp. So for a company that is able to carry themselves back at the bottom of that Lassonde, let's just say today we're trading at, say, 60 cents. If we come up with another project and you're at 60 cents, when we bought Balmoral, we were at 7 cents and we reached $1.30. And today we're trading around 60. So we're still about an 8 to 9 multiple. But you imagine if you could put yourself today at the same stage on the Lassonde curve, that opportunity exists for it to still be multiples of where we are today. That's where you want to invest. You want to invest in those companies that have that kind of opportunity afforded to you.
That really is something important for people who are new to understand, that for companies like Walbridge, you may have one key asset, but when you have multiple projects, I think people think of a mining company and they think of one big mine. In reality, you never stop doing exploration, whether that's inside of the deposit you're mining, right? And continuing to grow your assets. So it's important not just to look at the project that's the farthest along, but like you're saying, what's the pipeline, right? What's going to be coming in next to kind of pull that back?
Yeah. And that's by the way, same goes for even investing in operating companies. Because if you have an operating company that has only one project, the odds of another discovery on that same project as opposed to that company having two assets is less, right? I mean, that's why companies like Barrick or Agnico or Kirkland or other large companies, Newmont Gold Corp, these guys have more than one operation. And there's a reason for it. And it's a multi-asset operations, and that's how you get value from it. If Whetstone Gold Mines only had the Eagle property, even though it has had quite a long life, at one point it's going to be depleted, or it gets too expensive because it might go too deep. So now they have the Kena project. So obviously, if they just had Kena now, or have Kena 4 years from now, if they don't add to it, the market expects that to not give them the same premium as they are getting today. If Kirkland only had Macassa, wouldn't work because they needed the Fosterville. And then obviously they need to add more if they continue to deplete. And same thing with Barrick or Agnico. Every time you deplete, you better be able to replenish. Otherwise, you're really taking value from your company every day.
I always tell people also to look at the exploration budget of those bigger companies. Certainly companies grow through acquisition as well. But I know I've had a few conversations within the larger companies that they can really do exploration very efficiently. They can add ounces very efficiently and at a lower price when you get to a certain point, right? Because you're large enough to have those operational efficiencies. But it's still important to make sure that the company is investing in exploration. It would be like if Prospector, we're a mining technology firm. If we weren't investing in research and development, don't invest in us, right? Because we're not going to be coming out with anything new, right? How grow if you're not investing in growth.
Yeah, and the unfortunate part about the industry as a whole is, at least in my lifetime and my career, I worked for large companies, and typically when the commodity prices were down, the very first thing that got slashed was exploration teams, because at the time they believed we already have another 10 years, we catch up later. Whereas it's not true, because at the end of the day, if you don't continue doing exploration, you basically have to live with what you thought that you have for the next 7 or 10 years. But you never found something, maybe something was better than what you have today, and you're not getting any value for it. And that's one of the reasons I've always believed that major finds are typically not done by major companies, but they've been done by junior exploration companies.
We talk a lot on this podcast about how important the juniors are. They're very different from the larger companies, but they're so critical to how the industry operates because they take that high level of risk and they create that.
Exactly. But the rewards are better for the investors in terms of, if Barrick tomorrow found a 5 million ounce deposit, it's not going to move the needle on their share price. Whereas a junior company that can come up with a 5 million ounce deposit can certainly give you a lot of multiples. So that's exactly why. Right. Junior exploration companies don't give dividends, but when they give dividends, they give it quite well.
No, that's so true. Now, you had mentioned something when we were talking a little while ago too about how important your sustainability and kind of those factors are, or in the context too of being in a lower risk area and the First Nations support of your project. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, because I also think when people hear ESG, they're thinking like, oh, I'm worried about pollution in a cobalt mine in Africa with child labor, right? And it's equally as important in a more advanced jurisdiction like Quebec when it comes to legislation and regulation.
I think when you're in most developed countries, Canada being one of them, the E portion has already been taken care of in majority of cases by the regulations and the governments. It's really the S&G that we want. We focus on our environmental, not because of the regulation, but we know how it's been done. It's been done for so long. There's guidelines for it and everything else. But when it comes to the essence, the social and the governance points, it's really important for companies to focus on those. One of the things we did, and I mean, this comes from my consulting days, because I also consult for a lot of First Nation communities when I owned my consulting company. And one of the things that I used to hate was when mining companies used to go to the First Nation communities when they needed their signature on a document or when they needed them. And the last thing you do to a group that you want to be partners with is to sandbag them for the entire project and then go back when you need them. When we purchased Fenelon, we were an Ontario-based company. We were going to a different province with a different language and a different environment altogether and different First Nation communities. So one of the things we said is we are going to, first day that we purchased, we met with the various First Nation groups. And we explained who we are. We're coming in here. We are, new neighbor. And we decided to send them a monthly report, which we still do, but now it's weekly meetings with them. But for the first few years, we gave them a monthly report of what we did the month before and what we're planning to do next month. So they were aware. Even though we may not have anything to do with them, we kept them abreast of what was going on. And so today we have weekly meetings with our 3 First Nation communities. Every week, my VP Mining and our project manager meets with them. So the social aspect is important. The other thing is being local, because at the end of the day, if you're going somewhere, whether you're going to Finland or to Ecuador or you're going to Quebec, you better make sure you utilize the existing local resources first, regardless of whether it's the labor resource, whether it's the supply resources or whatnot, because that's important, because you get the community support right behind you. When you need them, they know that that's also their livelihood.
Right. It's benefiting them as well as the company.
Exactly. So one of the things we've done is we've made sure that we maximize the local resources unless they're not available, unless that technical expertise or that supply is not available. Most of our supplies come from Matagami or Lassar or Rouen and Val-d'Or area. It doesn't come from Ontario. So those are another parts of the social side that you really need to take care of. On the governance side, it's also important to make sure that what you say is what you do. And that's important. And I'm on a corporate governance side. We certainly have a pretty good corporate governance committee. Our board of directors are very cognizant of what's going on around us. We have very stringent policies and procedures, if you may. In fact, to be honest with you, we had a former chairman who's passed away, and he used to say, you got to act like a big guy in order to be recognized as reputable. So we always had advanced ourselves better than just a junior company. But even on the local side, in terms of operations, you need some governances. You need some internal controls to make sure that, you're not creating a kind of a practice that could potentially impact your shareholders. Because at the end of the day, we all work for our shareholders. I mean, I'm employed by them. I've got to make sure that I protect their investment. And protecting their investment also means that we do the right things.
My career started in consulting as well, with IBM's consulting group, and straight out of college. And so much of what I learned as a consultant has informed what I do now as a business owner and as a leader, because you work with so many different kinds of clients on different kinds of problems, and you see commonalities across businesses, right? And, key lessons you pull out of that. And I wonder if that's been similar to your experience.
Yeah, it has. As a matter of fact, our chairman, who used to be the CEO prior to me joining, also used to work for a consulting company. So as a result, the kind of environment and the work environment we had created, and we have so far even, is that we want to develop people. So our geologists aren't just core loggers. They don't have a certain silo that they only do this every day. We actually give assignment to the geologists that they actually get to talk to the drillers, plan the drill holes, see the core, log the core, but then realize how's that put into the model. They are part of that modeling process. And all the way, even when we were doing the bulk sample, even on the underground portion, we rotated the geologists so they actually see the material that was coming out of the stopes, so they could see that. So what they designed or modeled as a resource, they ended up seeing it coming out and see the result from the metallurgical side and the mill. So they saw the gold bar coming out of it. So those are the reasons why, as a consultant, you almost create that entrepreneurial aspect within the organization. I hope we can continue to do that. Of course, it gets more difficult as the company grows. I mean, when I started, the company had 16 employees. Today, we're over 100 employees. And together with the contractors, we have over 200 and some odd people at the site. So things can become more difficult. I was telling one person that every time we hire an employee, there's a list that comes out. I go on LinkedIn, search to see if they're available, and I actually connect with them because I want to connect with them. But I'm not sure for how long I can do that if we continue to grow.
No, the ability to scale is a challenge for every kind of business, right? And when you hit those kind of true growth points, that's where I think management and the company culture becomes so important, because you've got to be ready to jump on it, right? When the opportunity is there for growth, you've got to be able to do it, but do it smartly and keep everybody invested and on the same page. I've seen that in, working for, some of the biggest companies like IBM, and I worked for the U.S. Department of Defense for years, down to being an entrepreneur. And it's when you hit those moments, and it sounds like Wallbridge is kind of at one of those moments too, where, man, buckle up, everybody, right?
That's why you always sort of build around the existing team that you've created, and you build as a fit for purpose. If you need, like, for example, we knew that as you continue to grow, we had a small HR group. Now we're looking for a human resources manager to be able to put everything together, make sure the policies are right, make sure it's being followed. And retention is important for us because we want the A team of every person. All of our people should be the A team, right? So to keep them, you want to make sure you've done everything for them, that they have no choice but wanting to stay with you because that's the best for them.
No, I think that's wonderful to hear, because you don't oftentimes hear companies in our industry, they talk about their assets and they're talking about the geology. But what I hear you saying is, your people are really your greatest asset. And it's easy to put that on, your recruiting language and stuff. But it really is, if you aren't investing in your people and keeping them integrated in with what you're doing, then they're punching a clock as opposed to bringing their full capabilities to the table.
No doubt in my mind. And in fact, I know some junior companies don't necessarily, and by the way, like Wallbridge, up to the time that we had purchased Farallon, I don't believe we ever laid off anybody because we had a joint venture with various larger companies that we carried out exploration even in down cycles. But one of the things that's important is the development of the staff to make sure you keep him and to keep him happy. They're the biggest asset of the company. You can raise $100 million today and bring 24 drills in there. If you don't have anybody to process that, the core, model it, understanding it, and not wasting the shareholders' money, you need to make sure you keep the good people around. And so that is the biggest asset you have, is your human asset. So.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a bit of a diversion in some sense, but we did an episode with a mining headhunter or recruiter a few episodes back. And she was talking about the kind of the skills gap or the interest gap, rather, right, in the younger generation and trying to attract people into the mining space. Is that something that you all are seeing at Wallbridge, or do you have is that something you're focused on?
Well, it certainly are. I mean, it's a dilemma that we're all facing with the new generation. Obviously, there's certain expectations from the employer, if you may, for the new generation in terms of the work environment, in terms of the work commitments. I have 3 kids who are aged between 30 and 26. They're all employed, but certainly the expectations that they have from their employer is much different than what I would have had when I was their age when I was working. There's certainly the loyalty is there because obviously they're getting paid for it, but from my point of view is you have to understand the basic needs. So as long as the basic needs are met, and that's being competitive in the industry, that's being make sure your camp is better than other camps. So that way, you make sure that they're welcomed there, that they can feel at home. But more importantly, you're going to have to make sure you develop or foster a culture that they understand that they're not stuck at the job. One of the key things for us is if you're looking to fill a position, first and foremost, you better look inside to see who you're going to be able to promote to that position first before you apply somewhere else. That's key because even if you do one a year, people understand that I have opportunities to grow. I'm not always stuck in this position. And that's what we've done. And in fact, our VP Exploration was one of our project geologists. That is now our VP Exploration. That came through. In fact, he was our student that we had sponsored his PhD program. And he's now our VP Exploration. One of our senior project geologists was again another student about 7 or 8 years ago. He's one of our senior project geos. And these are all young guys, ambitious, hungry to discover. and so you want to make sure you take care of them.
No, and that's where I think so much of what I see when I talk to the younger generation is, wanting to understand the impact of mining on the world at large, right? And I think we under communicate as an industry how critical we are to the future. We are literally pulling out the materials that will be used to build the low carbon economy, right? And renewable energy and electric vehicles. Like the world cannot do all of that without our industry, and getting into mining and exploration is a way to participate in that at the very kind of that seed stage of what goes on. And I think that's the biggest thing that I wish we as an industry talked about more and communicated, as well as the fact that people who get into this industry love the outdoors and the environment, and we love adventure. Like people don't willingly go walk out into the middle of nowhere to look for rocks who who hate the environment and don't ever want to do anything fun, right? Like we're a really fun and environmentally sensitive community. And I think that's the other message that needs to get out to convince young people to take a look at it, as well as the level of technology that we use now.
Exactly. I think we're behind in 2 areas. Number one is education, as you mentioned. The whole industry as a whole has done a lousy job in order to educate right from the young, perhaps even at the less than the high school, pre-high school type of time when kids are developing sort of a desire or some sort of a tendency towards something. And that's when you can start talking about the importance of mining, the fun that they can have being a geologist out in the field, or a mining, the underground mining. I'm a mining engineer. I find the underground actually is, especially if you live in the Northern Ontario, or if you live in the Sub-Saharan, temperatures never change much underground as long as it doesn't go too deep. So it's actually a pretty good climate, and it's safe. It's just as safe as a factory floor. So in that's one area. And I think the second part of where we are lacking in terms of mining is the fact that we're not explaining enough to the population as a whole, how important the elements that we produce are to their everyday life.
Yeah, I'm seeing some of that creep into normal conversation with the focus on critical minerals, right? And stuff like that. It seems like it's becoming more of a topic, but I think that's the biggest thing that we could do, because and I always tell people, like, if you would invest in Tesla, why wouldn't you invest in the companies that mine the metal that make the Tesla cars and the lithium batteries?
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Marz, for joining us. I look forward to following along and seeing how your company and your team do, and we look forward to having you back on sometime soon.
Excellent, Emily. It was nice to meet you, and thank you very much.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you to our guest and my colleague, Marz Cord, for joining us on this episode of On the Rocks. To learn more about Marz and Wallbridge, visit wallbridge.com and check them out on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. For more about Prospector, go to prospectorportal.com or check us out on Instagram at ProspectorAI and LinkedIn at ProspectorPortal. Thanks for joining us on the Rocks. Until next time, keep your glasses full and your ice cold. Cheers.